So you're Taiwan, a tech superpower, an Asian miracle, a prosperous little island, and a sovereign democratic nation. A neat portfolio that got you the title as an East Asian tiger. Just 80 years ago, Taiwan was a simple little island that became the refuge for the Republic of China, who fled the uprising of the Communist China government. Fast forward to today, Taiwan went from growing its agriculture economy and giving the world bubble teas into being a semiconductor powerhouse, providing more than 50% of the world's chip supply. A fact that even got the US nervous because China had time and time again declared their interest in reclaiming back Taiwan. Ironic, given that China themselves is one of the biggest importers of Taiwanese chips. So how did Taiwan found itself in the gridlock of global interests? Welcome to Gritflix, the channel that gives you high-quality mini-documentaries covering topics about money, power, and business. And this is Taiwan, the semiconductor powerhouse. The year was 1895, and the Japanese had just landed near Keelung, a coastal town in northern Taiwan, then also known as Formosa. Their aim? To seize Taiwan from the grasp of the Chinese Qing dynasty and use it to expand their growing empire. The Taiwanese army fought with everything they had to hold off the Japanese army, even resorting to guerrilla tactics. But over a bloody 5-month campaign, the Japanese army slowly but surely advanced southward towards Tainan City, crushing the Republican forces of Formosa, the regime at the time. Finally, with their army utterly battered and bruised, with inevitable defeat looming ahead, the Taiwanese surrendered, and the Treaty of Shimonoseki brought an end to the First Sino-Japanese War. The treaty recognized Taiwan as officially part of the Japanese Empire, and Japan would control Taiwan for the next 50 years. By the end of the Second World War, Japan was defeated, and Taiwan would once again come under the control of mainland China. Turns out, this was only the beginning. When China established a government in Taiwan, they were actually still in the middle of a vicious civil war between the communists and the nationalist factions. Talk about multitasking. Under Mao Zedong's leadership, the communists launched a brutal guerrilla warfare campaign that brought Beijing under communist control. And once Beijing had fallen, the rest of mainland China gradually fell too, forcing the nationalists to retreat into the corner of southeastern China. The communist revolution had succeeded, but the nationalists were far from ready to accept defeat. So, what did they do? Over the next 4 months, the nationalists fled to Taiwan, along with about 2 million loyal soldiers and civilians with plenty of cash and gold reserves. Once they got to Taiwan, they decided to rest and regroup before attempting to take over mainland China again. But eventually, the communists had gotten so strong that all attempts by the nationalists to take over mainland China ended in a crushing defeat. As time went by, they decided, if we can't get mainland China, why don't we focus on growing what we have? Finally, they rolled up their sleeves and began the back-breaking work of building Taiwan under Chiang Kai-shek's leadership as a Republic of China. The thing about Taiwan at this point was that, although the people were tired and scarred from decades of conflict, they had something very essential to any nation's growth. They had intelligent people, academics, researchers, and intellectuals who had all willingly agreed to flee the oppressive environment of Communist China, where intellectualism was perceived as a threat to the state. Interestingly, despite the wars, Taiwan was fairly well developed thanks to 5 decades of Japanese control. The Japanese wanted to make Taiwan a model colony to encourage other Asian countries to join its empire, so they put a lot of money and resources into developing Taiwan. Then, there were the tons of cash and gold that the nationalists brought when they fled, allowing them to back the newly issued New Taiwan dollar. Initially, between the 1950s and the 1960s, Taiwan relied heavily on foreign aid from the US. Like any ambitious, newly formed country at the time though, Taiwan wasted no time on working to develop their own economy. They started to produce consumer goods like sugar, textiles, and rice. Over time, Taiwan's economy developed and became one of the US's largest trading partners. Simultaneously, Taiwan's political landscape was shifting from martial law under a one-party dictatorship to a democracy. In 1988, the first democratically elected government came into power. The rhetoric of Taiwan as a military stronghold that was merely created to prepare for war steadily shifted into one of Taiwan as a nation to be proud of. In the 1990s, Taiwan got wind of an industry that would alter the course of the global economy forever. You see, computers are an essential part of our daily lives, and a vital part of these computers is microchips, or semiconductors. These tiny, powerful chips made it possible for phones, laptops, wristwatches, headphones, digital clocks, microwaves, refrigerators, and practically anything that worked with smart technology. And it did not stop there. Microchips were an essential part of military weapons, drones, intelligence equipment, and, anything that the military needed to win a war. So, without microchips, there was no advanced military technology, and with it, national vulnerability. When the tech giants in the West, IBM for one, discovered the importance of these microchips, it became clear that whoever controlled microchip production would be one of the most influential players in the world stage, hold vast amounts of geopolitical and economic power. So, Taiwan, sensing an opportunity, lured back many of their intellectuals, tech gurus, and engineers who had migrated to the US with the promise of lucrative salaries and job security. Their aim was to kickstart Taiwan's tech revolution now that their intellectuals had gained plenty of experience as engineers and executives in America's Silicon Valley. And turned out, Taiwan was in line to hit the jackpot. Enter Morris Chang, a Taiwanese engineer who had steadily climbed the ranks of Texas Instruments over the 25 years of his career until he reached the position of Group Vice President of TI's worldwide semiconductor business. His early exposure to semiconductor development and production uniquely positioned him to be a key player in Taiwan's rise to be the world's semiconductor powerhouse. Less than 3 years after he ended his stint at TI, he returned to Taiwan under invitation of Sun Yun-swan, then Premier of the Republic of China. Sun Yun-swan himself was another highly successful engineer and whose leadership was instrumental in bringing Taiwan from obscurity into a key economic player in East Asia through various infrastructure projects ranging from building airports and expressways to even building a nuclear power plant. Maybe we should have more engineers as national leaders. With the Premier's backing, Chang became the chairman and president of the Industrial Technology Research Institute, working to promote technological development in Taiwan. It wasn't long before he ended up founding Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. TSMC zoomed in on a major need in the semiconductor industry. You see, there were plenty of famous companies who developed chips. Think Intel, Qualcomm, Nvidia, and AMD. These companies were experts at developing the chip's designs, upgrading it every year with more power and smaller sizes. But they find the actual chips production itself to be painful. It can take years to produce a chip from start to finish, not to mention the billions of dollars needed to set up a fabrication factory. It was a risky business with long-term payoff. So, Chang decided to fill this gap by setting up TSMC and making it the world's first dedicated semiconductor factory. Let the companies provide the designs and he'll make the chips. Win-win. Fast forward to today, TSMC Taiwan was reported to account for over 50% of the world's microchip supply, contributed about 15% of Taiwan's GDP, and its stock even made up 1/3 of the value of the Taiwan Stock Exchange. This growth naturally further boosted Taiwan's economy, earning them a spot as a tiger of Asia. As of 2019, its GDP was $586 billion, making it one of the largest in the world with GDP per capita of just under $25,000 per year. TSMC's dominance in semiconductor production not only boosted Taiwan's economy, but also made the country indispensable to global trade, especially to the US, where the biggest semiconductor developers resided and contributed to the US economy. Do you remember back in 2020, suddenly it was very difficult to find electronics like PS5, certain cars, and graphics cards? That was a shortage caused by semiconductor manufacturers reducing their production capability, thinking rationally that people must be buying less during a crisis. Well, people were seldom rational, and turned out most people who were stuck at home and very bored now realized they had extra cash to go shopping. That decision resulted in order backlogs we're still experiencing today and massive loss in the economy. That's how crucial these chips were. So Taiwan and the US are buddies, at least for now. Last year, US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan bearing the US promise that it will protect the sovereignty of Taiwan at all costs. But as you know, the US don't support countries out of the goodness of their hearts. There was an interest at stake here, and at the heart of it were the microchips. The US knew how badly their tech, military, and economy will be hit if China succeeded in taking over Taiwan, or, at the very least, disrupted the supply chain. Somebody must be kicking themselves about letting the whole production line go to Taiwan instead of the US mainland decades ago. In 2020, former President Trump had been the first to initiate talks about bringing TSMC on board to set up semiconductor fabrication facilities in the US with a $40 billion investment, a position that President Biden is continuing in a more open manner. For example, in August 2021, Biden sanctioned his administration's first arms sale to Taiwan, a $750 million weapons package. Better too late than never, right? On the other hand, if the US developed its semiconductor industry to match Taiwan's, they might have less incentive to protect the island nations. It will take years to get the new facilities operational and contributing meaningfully to the chips supply though. So Taiwan still has time, even though it's running out. Meanwhile, the threat of war between China and Taiwan seemed more imminent now than ever. The US would rather avoid a direct war with China over Taiwan because nobody will win. It would be chaos across every global supply chain at a scale beyond what the Russian invasion of Ukraine did last year. So far, the US has successfully kept the proverbial wolves at bay, keeping Taiwan safe from the looming threat of invasion. But how long will this tenuous peace last? The Chinese Communist Party under President Xi Jinping has time and time again reminded the world of their One China policy, which aims to unite Taiwan with mainland China no matter the cost. And the costs? Well, they're very high indeed. This belief in Taiwan as part of the mainland is eerily similar to how China viewed Hong Kong long before Britain returned the territory back to China. And we know how well that went. If the CCP succeeds in taking over Taiwan, the Taiwanese feared they would no longer have their freedom, democracy, and autonomy. Yet, for all the propaganda about reunification with Taiwan, it is clear that, once again, chips lie at its core. China desperately wants to control its production. It is an Achilles heel in China's economic and military machine. By taking over Taiwan, China ultimately gets control of the largest semiconductor production industry in the world. Such influence in the hands of a major economic power with controversial policies such as their handling of minorities and oppressive handling of the COVID crisis is, to say the least, horrifying. Also, Taiwan forms part of the first island chain. This refers to a network of islands from the East Asian continental mainland coast, including the Kuro Islands, the Japanese archipelago, the Ryukyu Islands, and Taiwan, extending northeast to the Malay Peninsula. The first island chain is crucial because it directly affects trade relations between the US and Asia. It is the most strategic position from which anyone can counter a military attack by China. Currently under influence of the US, the first island chain ensures that China cannot completely block off the US military from entering a possible battlefield and becomes even stronger than it already is. If China should get a hold of Taiwan, it could divide the chain into two, thereby controlling trade movements between Asia and the surrounding countries like Australia, the Philippines, Japan, Russia, and by extension, the US. Suffice to say, China taking over Taiwan will be bad news not just for Taiwan, but for the entire world. Taiwan is willing to do everything it takes to protect its democracy and sovereignty. The youths are learning how to use firearms and defend themselves. The government is buying more weapons, and the rich are contributing their fortunes to civil defense groups.
The real defense has to be the bravery of the Taiwanese people, the willingness to protect your nation. That's a real defense.
$100 million is a hell of a lot of money. You're really putting your money where your mouth is.
People say it's a lot of money. No, compared to freedom, it's nothing. But I already swear that I will not live to see Taiwan become Hong Kong. I will fight for it.
But no matter what Taiwan does, its forces are still a mere fraction of China's power. China is working hard to intimidate Taiwan, and Xi Jinping is not above resorting to the lowest, dirtiest tactics. Targeted policies aimed at stifling the Taiwanese economy, thousands of cyber attacks targeted at the Taiwanese government to extract sensitive information and sabotage their defense, flying fighter jets all over Taiwan's airspace, sending military ships to its borders, you name it. The Taiwanese people are going about their ordinary lives with China breathing down their necks. As China intensifies their bullying tactics, the US has had to start supporting Taiwan more openly. Yet despite the increased cooperation between US and Taiwan to build up their forces, China has so far been undeterred. In fact, the only thing that seems to be stopping China right now is the fact that any attempt to take over Taiwan could result in Taiwan getting destroyed, which would defeat the purpose of taking control of it in the first place. But if Putin could attempt to take over Ukraine so blatantly, there's no assurance that Xi Jinping, who implicitly supported Putin with inaction throughout the conflict, will not follow in his footsteps. So, do you think China would actually pull the trigger? And will the US keep their word to defend Taiwan? Let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's video.